working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. Welcome to ASEAN in Focus. Joining me today is from our EBC Thailand Bureau. Hello, Cristel.
Hi, Alma. I am Cristel Papa from EBC Thailand Bureau, giving you the news of the dynamic ASEAN region.
On today's headlines. President Duterte announced Monday night that Metro Manila, or the National Capital Region, will remain under general community quarantine till the end of December.
Vietnam reported its first local transmission of COVID-19 in nearly 3 months on Monday, with officials scrambling to prevent a wider outbreak in the country's most populous city.
ASEAN ministers in charge of disaster management agreed on the strategic direction of regional cooperation in mitigating disaster losses and responding to disaster emergencies for the next 5 years.
And superstar Cher welcomed the world's loneliest elephant to Cambodia Monday to begin a new life at a specialized sanctuary after the creature was rescued from grim conditions in a Pakistani zoo.
President Duterte announced Monday night that Metro Manila, or the National Capital Region, will remain under general community quarantine for the month of December. Let's listen in.
Upon the recommendation of the task force sa COVID-19, the following areas will be under general community quarantine from December 1 to 31. Let me explain. Alam mo kasi sa mga news, hapon-hapon, wala talagang social distancing o wala ang iba hindi they did not wear mask. Ayaw nila. At matigas ang ulo. Now, let me remind you that Europe and America are experiencing what they would call, some say, the third wave na pagbalik. Mas marami ang nagkasakit ngayon at namatay. This is a country which is rich, na dapat may bakuna na can afford it. And yet, maraming nagkakasakit, namatay. For the simple reason, matigas ang ulo, ayaw. Ngayon, yung sa Pilipinas, pati itong mga critics, nga, bakit rumami? Bakit hindi rumami na lumabas na ang lahat? Bakit? Mapigilan mo? Papiliin na ng gobyerno? Mapakain ba ng gobyerno ang lahat? Yan ang istorya dyan. Kung hindi sila maglabas ng bahay, can you sustain their lives while inside the house? Nobody's buying food, hindi nakikita, walang trabaho, wala lahat. Kaya napipilitan lumabas. It's between hunger and the...
President Duterte renewed his call to the public to observe quarantine protocols such as frequent hand washing, physical distancing, and the wearing of face masks and face shields. Metro Manila mayors earlier recommended that retaining GCQ status for the rest of the year. Now, the Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases expressed doubts over further relaxing quarantine restrictions as it may result in a possible spike in cases. The Department of the Interior and Local Government earlier proposed to ban holiday parties, caroling, and other mass gatherings. Last week, the President also reminded the public to strictly follow minimum health and safety protocols to prevent a post-holiday surge of infections. As of Monday, data from the Department of Health showed the country logged 1,773 new cases, raising the country's active cases to 24,580. A total of 44 patients recovered, raising the total recoveries to 398,658, while 19 more deaths pushed the death toll to 8,392.
Staying in Philippines, Department of Interior and Local Government Secretary Eduardo Año said that the gradual expansion of the age groups allowed to go out of their homes and enter the malls will push through this holiday season, provided that they are accompanied by their parents. Let's listen in.
Wala pong katulad po ng plano na hindi po papayagan party, hindi rin papayagan caroling, wala pong mass gathering. Yung pong family reunion ay isang considered na mass gathering. Katulad po ng sabi ni Secretary Duque, immediate family na lang sana. Ang kailangan po ang minimum health standard ay patutupad. Doon po sa pinag-utos natin na pwede ng gradual expansion ng mga age group para makalabas. Ang mga minors po, basta accompanied ng mga magulang, ay papayagang makalabas at makapunta sa mall. Ito po ay pagtitibayan sa mga ordinansa ng ating mga NCR mayors sa lugar po ng GCQ.
In October, the Metro Manila mayors discouraged the holding of holiday parties amid the threat of COVID-19 as well as the Catholic tradition of caroling. Experts noted that studies showed that individuals release respiratory droplets when singing, which may lead to getting the virus. In Thailand, Thai police charged 5 key leaders of the country's pro-democracy protest movement Monday under the kingdom's tough royal defamation laws, the first such use of the controversial legislation in 2 years.
And also about
Section 112 of the Thai Penal Code is one of the world's toughest lèse majesty laws, shielding the ultra-powerful King Mahavajiralongkorn from criticism. But in recent months, leaders of the pro-democracy movement have called for reforms to the monarchy, including for the law's abolition, a move that has sent shockwaves through Thai society. Human rights activist Anon Numpa, one of the most prominent faces rallying for royal reform, and 4 others arrived at a Bangkok police station for questioning Monday. They have been charged over their role in a September rally, and if found guilty, face up to 15 years in prison per charge. They have led dozens of protests since July, the largest drawing tens of thousands supporting their demands. They are also calling for a rewrite of the military-scripted constitution and the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, a former army chief who came to power in a coup in 2014. Scores of protesters have been hit with sedition charges, while authorities have stepped up enforcement tactics in recent weeks, deploying water cannon and tear gas against unarmed demonstrators. Meanwhile, in Vietnam reported its first local transmission of COVID-19 in nearly 3 months on Monday, with officials scrambling to prevent a wider outbreak in the country's most populous city. The communist nation was applauded earlier this year for controlling the pandemic with strict restrictions on movement, extensive quarantine measures, and a robust track and trace regime. But late on Monday, the health ministry announced that it had detected coronavirus in a 30-year-old man in Ho Chi Minh City, a relative of a Vietnam Airlines flight attendant who tested positive on the weekend. A temporary lockdown has been made on locations where the patient had visited, the ministry said in a statement, adding that dozens of people in contact with the latest case had been put under quarantine. Vietnam has recorded just 1,347 coronavirus cases and 35 deaths across a country of 95 million. Life has almost returned to normal in the country over the past almost 3 months, despite a summer outbreak centered on the beach resort city of Da Nang that put health authorities back on high alert.
International students have arrived in Australia for the first time since the country shut its borders to curb the coronavirus in March, with a charter flight touching down in Darwin on Monday. Now, Australian universities have been leaking cash due to the country's indefinite border closure, which has locked out foreign students who keep the billion-dollar sector afloat. A plane chartered by Charles Darwin University carrying 63 international students arrived in the northern city of Darwin as part of a pilot program aimed at kickstarting the higher education industry. The students from mainland China, Hong Kong, Japan, Vietnam, and Indonesia traveled to Singapore to catch the flight and will now spend 14 days in a government quarantine facility. The mix of new and continuing students are enrolled across a range of undergraduate and postgraduate courses, including law, nursing, and engineering. In a statement, CDU said it was an important first step in the recovery of the international education sector in Australia. Education is listed as Australia's fourth largest export behind iron ore, coal, and natural gas, with more than 500,000 international students enrolled last year, bringing about 37 billion Australian dollars into the economy.
The UN said on Tuesday that a record of $35 billion would be needed for aid in 2021 as the global coronavirus pandemic levels tens of millions more people in crisis and with the risk of multiple famines looming. The world body's global humanitarian overview estimated that 235 million people worldwide will need some form of emergency assistance next year, a staggering 40% increase compared with 2020. That's CNN.
The picture we are presenting is the bleakest and darkest perspective on humanitarian need in the period ahead that we have ever set out, I think. And that is a reflection of the fact that the COVID pandemic has wreaked carnage. At the beginning of 2020, we thought that nearly 170 million people in the world would need humanitarian assistance this year. Coming into 2021, we think that's going to be 235 million people. That's a 40% increase. And the increase arises almost entirely because of COVID-19. And in order to deal with this set of problems, we are in the GHO setting out plans to reach 160 million of the most vulnerable people in 56 countries. And those plans, if they're fully financed, will cost $35 billion.
In other news, the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, in collaboration with Vietnam's Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, the ASEAN Secretariat, the World Organization for Animal Health, or OIE, and the Wildlife Conservation Society, or WCS, held the Wildlife Conservation and Zoonotic Diseases, Halting Species Loss and Tackling Public Health in the ASEAN webinar last of November 19. In his opening remarks, Deputy Secretary General of ASEAN for ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, Kang Fo Wak, highlighted that the COVID-19 pandemic and its recovery should be seen as an opportunity to explore ways and leverage existing partnership and initiatives towards a more collective and coordinated response to mitigate impacts. Citing a recent study, Dr. Gyanendra Gongal, the regional advisor of the World Health Organization office in Southeast Asia, shared that as of July 2020, the total damage resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic has amounted to $11.5 trillion. ASEAN, as a regional body, has taken steps to combat the pandemic, such as the declaration of the Special ASEAN Summit on COVID-19, the ASEAN Strategic Framework for Public Health Emergencies, and the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework, and implementation plan to chart a path to recover and build back better. The COVID-19 pandemic catalyzed an increased awareness of the need for nature-based solutions and cross-sectoral actions, according to ACB Executive Director Teresa Mondita Lim. ASEAN member states such as Vietnam and the Philippines are currently initiating One Health efforts as a response to the emerging diseases like COVID-19. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, key programs on joint wildlife surveillance, education and public awareness campaigns, and interagency coordination are among the responses of the government, according to Dr. Ronnie Domingo, Director of the Bureau of Animal Industry of the Philippines Department of Agriculture.
The Armed Forces of the Philippines, or AFP, does not engage in red tagging leftist lawmakers, President Rodrigo Duterte said Monday night, insisting that the military was actually identifying them as legal fronts. In a taped speech, Duterte said that AFP is very correct for identifying groups like Bayan, Makabayan, and Gabriela as legal fronts of the Communist Party of the Philippines, New People's Army, or CPP-NPA. Let's watch this.
Itong mga legal fronts ng komunista, lahat yan, Makabayan, Bayan, they are all legal fronts. Gabriela, hindi yan sila, we are not red tagging you. We are identifying you as members in a grand conspiracy comprising all the legal fronts that they have organized, headed by NDF, ang New People's Army, NDF, at Communist Party of the Philippines. Ilang tao na nagaling doon sa inyong camp openly have attacked you, not only criticize for your sheer brutality in this communal war. Communal war ito, there is no longer any ideology. Gusto lang nila umagaw ng gobyerno. Mga bobo naman. Sino ang mga bright? Si Season? Yun yung bright, si Season? Iharap mo si Season sa akin, magdebate kami. Ano nakuha mo dyan sa ideology na communism? You are accusing red tagging you. No, the armed forces of the Philippines is very correct. You are being identified as the members of the communist pala, alam namin. Yun ang totoo, hindi red tagging. Yung sasarate, kasi lahat kayo. Alam ko, sabihin ko, ngailangan ka ng pera. That's the only reason. Komunista ka to defend an oligarch. Hindi ka naman summa cum laude. Pareho naman tayo pumasa ng bar. Kung magsalita ka, you make it appear that we are milking the government of...
In a Senate hearing last week, Zarate denied being a member of CPP-NPA and denounced the AFP's red tagging of the Makabayan bloc in the House of Representatives. He said Bayan Muna and members of the Makabayan bloc are legitimate groups pushing for meaningful social reforms. The CPP-NPA-NDF is listed as a terrorist organization by the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the Philippines.
Facebook and Google are fast becoming human rights-free zones in Vietnam. Amnesty International warned on Tuesday, accusing the tech titans of helping censor peaceful dissent and political expression in the country. Communist Vietnam has long jailed its critics but has come under fire in recent years for targeting users on Facebook, a popular forum for activists in the country where all independent media is banned. The social network admitted earlier this year that it was blocking content deemed illegal by authorities, while its latest transparency report revealed a nearly 1,000% increase in the content it censors on government orders compared to the previous 6 months. Now, Amnesty said in a Tuesday report that it had interviewed 11 activists whose content had been restricted from view in Vietnam by Facebook this year. The rights group also said 3 others had similar content censored by Google-owned YouTube. One of them, Nguyen Van Trang, who fled an arrest warrant in Vietnam for his involvement in a pro-democracy group, according to Facebook. And Facebook had since May restricted every piece of content he posted about Communist Party boss Nguyen Phu Trong and senior party member Tran Quoc Vuong. Now, Trang also said some of his posts on controversial issues such as land disputes were blocked from view in Vietnam by YouTube. More than 53 million people use Facebook in Vietnam, accounting for over half the population. The platform is also a crucial marketing tool for local business. Vietnam is now the biggest country by revenue for Facebook and Google in Southeast Asia, according to industry experts. But Amnesty warned that while they were once the great hope for the expansion of freedom of expression in the country, social media platforms are fast becoming human rights free zones.
Kumanta, sumaya tayong lahat. Kasaya-saya.
Hello there. Imagine Dami got the virus and she infected 2 more. And those 2 infected a lot more of people. And it goes on and on until it became an epidemic. But what if Dami stayed at home? Then those 2 wouldn't have contracted the virus. Then those people would have not been infected. This is not just your battle, it's everyone's, and you can be a huge help. Follow social distancing, or better yet, stay at home.
Welcome back to ASEAN in Focus. ASEAN member states are speeding up their economic integration by mitigating intra-Asian trade challenges and accelerating seamless trade in goods by roads with the new ASEAN Customs Transit System, or ACTS. The ACTS, according to Bernama, was developed to streamline cross-border customs processes with the aim of accelerating land transit movements and reducing the time and expense of carrying out regional trade in goods. The broader objective is to reduce intra-ASEAN trading challenges and enable companies to benefit more from the ASEAN economic community and the free movement of goods across the ASEAN region. The 37th ASEAN Summit was held earlier this month, and the ACT's live operation, which was implemented on November 2, signaled a clear illustration of ASEAN's commitment. Royal Malaysian Customs Department Senior Assistant Director Dr. Ramla Mukhtar said pilot tests were taken between January and October 2020 to evaluate how components under the ACTS can be utilized by Cambodia, Laos, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. ASEAN Federation Forwarders Association's Executive Director Iman Gandhi said ACTS was developed to streamline cross-border customs processes aimed at accelerating transit movements and reducing the time and expense of carrying out regional trade in goods.
The ASEAN leaders' decision to create an ASEAN Economic Community, or AEC, is intended to introduce the free flows of goods, services, investment, and skilled labor, and freer flow of capital in the region for the AEC to take root. The establishment of a fully harmonized customs and transport environment is of the highest priority. Take a look.
ASEAN, a big expanding market. ASEAN and the EU share common objectives for economic integration and free trade. The ASEAN Economic Community is a reality, driving forwards a single market and a production base, and connecting a highly competitive region fully integrated with the global economy. ASEAN acts as a focus for the free movement of goods, services, and investments. Together, the 10 member states generated $3 trillion in 2018, making ASEAN the 5th largest economy in the world. With the highest potential growth globally, ASEAN is set to be the world's 4th largest economy by 2050. The ASEAN Customs Transit System, or ACTS, creates a trade facilitation platform for the free movement of goods in the region. Developed jointly by ASEAN and the European Union, ACTS removes the need for multiple customs declarations at borders. ACTS requires only one electronic declaration, one guarantee, and one truck for the entire journey. This means faster, more reliable on-time deliveries and lower transport costs, backed by state-of-the-art tracking and monitoring capabilities. ACTS ensures the safety and security of society, protecting public revenues and protecting public values. Regional integration and sustainable growth are values shared by ASEAN and the European Union. Driving towards the ASEAN Community Vision 2025, ACTS will play a key role in building the regional economy, taking the single market to the next level.
ASEAN ministers in charge of disaster management agreed on the strategic direction of regional cooperation in mitigating disaster losses and responding to disaster emergencies for the next 5 years. On 27th of November, they adopted the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, or AADMER, Work Program 2021 to 2025. The AADMER work program aims to build on the progress and develop a region of resilient nations that are coordinated in mitigating the effects of disasters in pursuit of safer communities and sustainable development. The new work program was endorsed during the 8th ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Disaster Management and the 9th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the AADMER. ASEAN's transformation into a region that is resilient and adaptive to all forms of disasters must be carried out through a multi-hazards approach in disaster management, said Secretary General of ASEAN Dato Lim Jock Hoi. Dato Lim also strongly urged the ASEAN community on disaster management to plant the seeds of collaboration with all stakeholders and nurture these relationships towards a common goal of reducing disaster losses and building a disaster-resilient ASEAN. ASEAN countries often experience a host of disasters ranging from earthquakes, floods, landslides, and typhoons, as well as human-induced disasters. The wide geographic stretch of incidences and increasing frequency of disasters require ASEAN communities to enhance their readiness and emergency response capacity. The Philippine Secretary of National Defense and outgoing chair of AMMDM, Delphine Lorenzana, mentioned that all ASEAN member states must continue working together to strengthen partnerships with ASEAN dialogue partners, humanitarian assistance actors, private sector entities, and other interested parties in realizing and fostering disaster risk governance. On his part, Singapore's Minister of State for Home Affairs and National Development and the incoming chair of AMMDM, Dr. Muhammad Faisal Ibrahim, mentioned that there are many opportunities for ASEAN to work together, adapt and transform to reach greater heights. The new AADMER work program will help to foster greater cooperation in the ASEAN region and take us one step closer towards operationalizing One ASEAN, One Response. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the meetings were held virtually this year.
Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand have finished discussing the frame of cooperation in the customs, immigration, and quarantine fields amid the COVID-19 pandemic and plan to endorse and adopt the partnership next year. Director of the Center for Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand Growth Triangle, or CIMT, Firdaus Dahlan, made the remarks after attending the 26th meeting of IMT-GT ministers held virtually on Thursday. The discussion on the partnership had come to a standstill since 2014. However, during the pandemic, the sub-regional partnership managed to conclude the discussion on FOC in the customs, immigration, and quarantine fields. He said this in a written statement. He also reiterated the three countries hope to endorse and to adopt the cooperation document in 2021. He also said the cooperation in the customs field is expected to bring about larger benefits to the trade sector and goods supply chain through simplified regulations and procedures. Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, which share land and sea borders, established economic and trade cooperation called the Indonesia-Malaysia-Thailand Growth Triangle, or the IMT-GT, in 1993. And the aim of this is to improve welfare and economic growth in the three countries, the total population of about 84 million.
Senior officials from ASEAN and the European Union gathered virtually on 27th of November for the second EU-ASEAN high-level dialogue on environment and climate change. EU and ASEAN discussed their cooperation on shared regional and global challenges related to the protection of the environment and the fight against climate change, as agreed in the joint statement of the 22nd ASEAN-EU Ministerial Meeting. Astrid Schoemaker, Director for Global Sustainable Development at the European Commission's Directorate General for Environment, Jacob Worksman, Principal Advisor, Directorate General for Climate Action, and Hazri Hassan, Director for International Policy at the Ministry of Sustainability and the Environment, who represented Singapore as the ASEAN-EU Country Coordinator, chaired the meeting. The European Green Deal, the outcomes of the 31st meeting of ASEAN senior officials on the environment, and putting sustainability at the heart of the recovery framework guided the discussion. The EU informed of its intention to work towards a global agreement on plastics, which deems to be important for both the EU and ASEAN, and highlighted the continued implementation of a plastics and marine litter project in 5 ASEAN countries. The dialogue also broached the subject of chemicals and waste, and stressing the importance of promoting safety and sustainability with reference to the relevant agreement, in which both ASEAN and EU are the parties to address waste trafficking and illegal waste dumping. This was followed by the welcome announcement that the preparation of an ASEAN platform on circular economy is underway. The EU is supporting its establishment as part of a joint initiative between the EU and ASEAN on circular economy. The platform will facilitate the sharing of good circular practices across ASEAN, engage key stakeholders, and help design policies that can accelerate a circular economy transition in ASEAN member states. The two sides directed their attention to biodiversity and natural capital and emphasized the importance of next year's conference of the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity in Kunming, and highlighted the urgent need to work together towards a realistic and ambitious post-2020 global biodiversity framework. The high-level dialogue was supported by the enhanced regional EU-ASEAN dialogue instrument, a development cooperation program that facilitates dialogues between the EU and ASEAN in priority policy areas of joint interest. Drawing on the EU's experience of regional integration, the E-Ready policy dialogue facility further strengthens both the ASEAN regional integration process as well as the overall ASEAN-EU partnership.
Meanwhile, European Commission Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis congratulated ASEAN on signing the RCEP. Take a look.
The EU is the third largest trading partner of ASEAN, as well as being one of the largest investors and the largest development donor in the region. We share a similar outlook on open markets, on the importance of the rules-based multilateral order, and on the value of regional cooperation. We should build on this shared outlook and even closer cooperation. We live in a time of many global challenges and risks. Therefore, it makes good sense for like-minded partners to work together as closely as possible. In this respect, I congratulate ASEAN on signing the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership with Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. This is a very important agreement for the Asia-Pacific region. The EU remains committed to launching a strategic partnership with ASEAN when all the conditions are in place. This is a high political priority for the EU and its member states. We now have bilateral trade agreements in place between the EU and 2 ASEAN partners, Singapore and Vietnam, and negotiations are ongoing with Indonesia. Those and other possible future bilateral agreements could serve as the building blocks towards deeper region-to-region relations. I want to acknowledge the serious work done by the EU-ASEAN Joint Working Group in preparing the ground for further bi-regional engagement. This work shows that while there are many important areas of commonality, there are also notable gaps, especially in areas of critical importance for the EU, such as trade and sustainable development, public procurement, and intellectual property rights. The EU is keen to make progress in these and other areas, and we are ready to engage further.
ASEAN in Focus. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Hindi mo ba alam, mauubos daw ang mga tissue products? Bakit naman? Ang raw materials daw ng mask at tissue products ay iisa lang. Saan naman galing ang balitang yan? Ay basta, narinig ko lang din. Maraming din kayang nagpo-post sa Facebook at Twitter, kaya kung ako sa'yo, kumuha ka na din. Sige na't mauna na ako sa'yo
Huwag basta-basta magpaniwala
sa mga nakikita
o nababasa sa social media.
Magsaliksik at i-verify ang lahat ng impormasyon
Nakukuha sa internet.
Tandaan,
maging responsable tayo
sa paggamit ng social media
nang hindi magdulot ng panik sa iba.
Kung paanong dapat labanan ng COVID-19.
Ay gayon din ang ating pagsugpo
sa black propaganda
At maling impormasyon.
Dennis Lu,
Lou Omelda,
General Partosa,
Tyranel Pililu,
Hannibal Arevalo,
EBC,
Japan, Euro. We live in interesting times.
Kickoff.
This much is certain. Something is coming. The fact check for the kickoff of the Bundesliga. Who are the favorites? Who should be nervous? And where might surprises be lurking? We dare to look ahead to the new season.
Kickoff.
Welcome back to ASEAN in Focus. S&P Global is keeping its growth forecast for the Philippines for this year and 2021, noting the impact of recent typhoons partly hindered chances of economic recovery brought about by improved people's mobility and employment. It forecast a 9.5% growth contraction for the domestic economy this year on account of the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, but a 9.6% recovery is projected for 2021. The report cited the progress in domestic economy activity following the easing of movement restrictions. For one, third quarter GDP posted a shallower contraction of 11.5% from the decade's high of 16.9% the previous quarter. However, while economic activities have registered some improvements as quarantine controls are slowly being lifted, the impact of typhoons Kinta, Rolly, and Ulysses, among others, which ravaged several parts of Luzon last October and early November, are considered as setbacks. Before the weather-related economic hit Luzon, which accounts for about 70% of the country's GDP, was hurt by the enhanced community quarantine that the government implemented from mid-March until end of April and was extended to end of May for the National Capital Region to address the rise of COVID-19 infections. Another negative factor is when the quarantine restriction in NCR was reverted from General Community Quarantine or GCQ to the stricter modified ECQ for 15 days last August to help the medical sector address the rising COVID-19 cases. Meanwhile, the report said economic activity slowed, but inflation rate accelerated on typhoon-induced supply disruption, although still within the government's 2 to 4% target for 2020 to 2022. Inflation last October rose to 2.5% from the previous month's 2.3%. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas or BSP forecast the November 2020 inflation to stay within a range of between 2.4 to 3.2%.
In other news, Vietnam's Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Minister Phan Binh Minh, paid courtesy calls on top Lao leaders as part of his two-day official visit to Laos. Now, at his meetings with Party General Secretary and State President Bunang Vorachit, Prime Minister Thonglut Sisulit, and President of the National Assembly Yato Tu Minh conveyed Vietnamese leaders' greetings to the counterparts and congratulated Laos on the 45th anniversary of its National Day, celebrated on December 2, and on effective management of the COVID-19 pandemic. He also expressed his belief that Laos will successfully organized the 11th National Party Congress in early 2021 and continue building itself into a strong and prosperous country with growing stature in the region and the world. Meanwhile, Lao leaders spoke highly of the two foreign ministries' efforts to maintain important cooperation mechanisms, affirming that the party, state, National Assembly, the government, and the people of Laos always treasures and places highest priority to the consolidation and enhancement of the great relationship, special solidarity, and comprehensive cooperation with Vietnam. The Lao leaders also expressed sincere thanks for Vietnam's valuable support and assistance for Laos' struggle for national independence in the past and national development course at present. They also thanked for Vietnam's support in the fight against the pandemic and the provision of 1,000 tons of rice to help Lao people affected by national disasters.
Says the best defense is still containment.
We are in uncharted territory.
Innovation, digital disruption, globalization. Startups, micro, small, and medium enterprises, as well as large corporations, all face interesting challenges in the market today. Peek into the world of exciting opportunities and partnerships to drive growth with the latest business news and information. We are open for business. Join the conversations to create a more vibrant environment for entrepreneurship. Catch Open for Business every Saturday from 5 to 6 p.m. Open for Business, from vision to action.
Kumanta, sumaya tayong lahat. Saya-saya.
Welcome back to ASEAN in Focus. Superstar Cher welcomed the world's loneliest elephant to Cambodia on Monday to begin a new life at a specialized sanctuary after the creature was rescued from grim conditions in a Pakistani zoo. Nasa Sine.
Kawan ជាដំរីមួយដែលរស់នៅដែលត្រូវបានគេដឹងថាជាដំរីដែលឯកោដែលមិនបានរស់នៅតាមធម្មជាតិរបស់គាត់ឥឡូវនេះគឺគាត់បានចូលមករស់នៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជានៅក្នុងព្រៃកម្ពុជាជាមួយនឹងសត្វដំរីញី3ក្បាលដែលកំពុងតែរងចាំគាត់ហើយកម្ពុជាបានផ្ដល់ផ្ទះឲ្យគាត់ផ្ដល់ជំរកថ្មីឲ្យគាត់ផ្ដល់ជីវិតថ្មីឲ្យគាត់ហើយផ្ដល់ក្តីសំណាងសម្រាប់គាត់ហើយយើងជឿជាក់ថាខាវ៉ាន់នឹងផ្ដល់នៅបង្កាត់ពូជដំរីអាស៊ីជាច្រើនទៀតសម្រាប់ប្រទេសកម្ពុជាបាទ
Welcome The plight of Kavan, a 36-year-old bull elephant at Islamabad's dilapidated zoo and originally from Sri Lanka, sparked global uproar from animal rights groups who launched a campaign to save him. His cause was boosted by spirited social media support from actress and musician Cher, who traveled to see him off from Pakistan and then to Cambodia to welcome him to his new home. Wearing a black face mask, the Oscar winner was on hand at Siam Reap Airport and waved excitedly at the plane after it landed around 2:30 p.m. Transporting an adult elephant by plane is no small task and has only been undertaken a handful of times. Helpers packed his trunk with 200 kilos of food to snack on during the 7-hour flight, while a tube system was installed in his transport crate aboard a jumbo Russian cargo plane to handle up to 200 liters of urine. For the last leg, he was loaded onto a truck for the 3-hour journey to his new home, a wildlife sanctuary in Odar Minchi province, which already hosts 3 female elephants. Cher followed behind in her own vehicle as Kavan made his way through farmland and past the famous Angkor Wat temple.
Thank you, Chriselle, for helping me out today. Thank you for joining me here on ASEAN in Focus.
Thank you, Alma. And just before I go, I would like to greet a happy birthday po to Ma'am Lynn Manalo, and may God continue to always bless you po.
Same here.
And
happy birthday po. Yes, go ahead.
And that's the latest news in the ASEAN region. Thank you for watching. I am Crystal Mapla from EBC Thailand Bureau. We live in interesting times.
Thank you. Thank you, Chriselle. Happy birthday po, Ma'am Lynn. And with that, I'm Alma Angeles. We live in interesting times.